Three, two. Hotep, brothers and sisters. It's good to see you. It's always good to be here. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. So happy to see all of you here and those of you who are on YouTube streaming. This is the Malefic Kete Asante Institute media, and this is our lectures. We are just delighted today to announce that our next lecture after today will be the Honorable Michael Cord, who will talk about the elections that are going on in America next week. So he will be here on the 10th, and I think it's the 10th, if my memory is correct. If I'm wrong, I'm certain that Dr. Jabali Ade will correct me for the date, the 12th. On the 12th, Michael Cord, the angriest attorney in America, the angriest man, he says, in America. He is clearly a historian, a political activist, and a very strong defender of the masses. So he will be here on November the 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm also delighted that we have been engaged. People who are supporters of the MKA Institute have been engaged fundamentally in trying to bring some order to the crises in the world. We're surrounded by crises. After all, we believe as Afro-ecologists and Afrocentric people in the fundamental principles of Ma'at. And these principles go back to the origin of human civilization. And they believe that it is impossible to have peace without truth, righteousness, and justice. These are fundamental values, and we always support people who are oppressed. We support all oppressed people. Sometimes people think that you can only support some oppressed people. You can support all oppressed people. And that's why I tell people that we were stunned, certainly, when the Jewish civilians were attacked in Israel. But we also are stunned by the incredible brutality of the bombs dropping on Gaza. We support all oppressed people. And I also have to remind people that in Darfur, right now in Sudan, the slaughter of black people, really that slaughter has been erased from Western news programs. If you watch television in America or you read the newspapers in America, it would seem like nothing is going on in Sudan. And yet in Sudan, there have been more people killed in Sudan than's been killed in Israel or Gaza. And that's the truth. But we don't know that because the news itself is political. And the people who report the news, that's also a political situation. It's a political situation because what people do is try to give you the news that they believe that the majority of the people who are paying them want to hear. They don't give you all the news. And so that's why we're so ignorant about what's going on in other parts of the world. So while I'm deeply concerned about what's going on in Southwest Asia, I am also fundamentally concerned about the incredible brutality going on in Sudan, Central African Republic, and the Congo. And I think that we would do ourselves an injustice if we don't call these out. If we don't say that we want peace everywhere. We don't just want peace in Israel and in Gaza, we want peace in Africa. And we also have to always be aware of the fact that if we don't do it, if our generation is not the one to put the world on an ethical and a moral foundation, then we don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. We are the ones who have the moral position. We have the ethical position, mainly because of our historical reality, what has happened to us as African people. We have a understanding of domination and violence, and we have an understanding of brutality, and we want to serve the interests of humanity. That is our key. Our key is that all humans deserve to live in peace. So that's the statement that we wanted to make. And I also want to just recognize Dr. Jabali Ade. I just purchased, and those of you who are listening around the world, you can do the same as I did. You can go to Amazon and purchase the book under the name of Aaron Smith. The book is Afrocentric Afrofuturism. It's a powerful book, and I've just ordered my copy. If you get a chance, order your copy. And we want to make this a book that is very popular, and people around the world should be able to read it. You'll find many, many interesting points by many scholars. He was kind enough to even have me, I believe, to write a section or a chapter in the book. So I'm very, very happy about that. So we are serious scholars. We are serious activists. We are deeply concerned about the conditions of our world. So I'm going to, at this time, just turn it over to our Associate Director, Dr. Jabali Ade, and ask him if he would introduce our speaker today. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Hotep, how y'all doing? Yeah, get some engine here. Yes, the text is Afrocentricity and Afrofuturism, Mississippi University Press. I'm so thankful to Dr. Asante just for setting that example of what's possible. You know, they always talk about the first person to run a mile in under so much time, or when Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. You know, after somebody sees that one can do it, everybody else, has that belief in themselves. So I really thank Dr. Asante, not just for motivating me, but for being the example of scholarship that he is. I was watching Ta-Nehisi Coates recently, and I was thinking to myself, a lot of people don't know, the contributions of his father. And this audience probably does with Black Classics Press. But I was thinking that's the blessing of the leadership and the example of Brother Paul Coates. The fact that he's there on that world stage receiving the National Book Award and, all the great things he's been able to do, that's in large measure because he's had somebody pouring into his life and setting that kind of example. And I have the privilege and the honor and the pleasure today to present to you and represent to others the second generation, of intellectual stimulation for our liberation, because a giant in the field, Dr. Na Dove, who wrote African Mothers, has given birth and poured into our presenter for the day. And this is someone who went to Lincoln University, so shouts out to, I know we have some supporters for that there. And also the University of London, and now is at Temple University pursuing a PhD. And oftentimes people talk about how important it is to be woke. But we need to know what put us to sleep. Right. So without further ado, I present to some and represent to others. I was about to say doctors. See, I was speaking it. At Temple, we so ready for them to get there and get out. Our PhD student at Temple University, Hope Dove.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Dr. Ade, and thank you, Dr. Asante and Anna Asante for the Institute. I know I'm among family today, so really thank you all for being here. And I hope that I shed some light on something today to do with, we're going to be dismantling the cultural construction of race in order to eradicate the delusion of white supremacy, which is what we're living under today. So to begin with, I start this from an Afrocentric perspective. We have our dear Dr. Asante here, and I just want to quote him just so we all know from what orientation we're understanding race. So Afrocentricity is a paradigmatic intellectual perspective that privileges African agency within the context of history and culture transcontinentally and transgenerationally. And that's the way that I'm going to be breaking down race, starting in Africa and from an Afrocentric perspective. This is the psychiatrist, scholar Frantz Fanon, and cognitive dissonance, which he spoke about, is key to understanding why it's so hard to let go of race, and also why racism is so sort of pervasive, because he discusses, right, that people hold a core belief, something, if we think of maybe a religious belief, or just something that people are taught is true from as far back as you can remember, something that is we live within. And evidence presents itself that this thing is not true. It becomes very difficult for us to have these two ideas. One, that this core belief, this thing that we were sure was true, that we have been told is true, and we maybe didn't even question, and then we're presented with something that says, actually, it's not true. And so what we do, that this causes cognitive dissonance, which is this discomfort. It's like in our brains, in our minds, we have this discomfort. This cannot be true if this is true. And so often what we do is to hold on to that core belief, we just excuse away this new evidence, and like it can't be true, or we make excuses to why we don't want to accept that, or we do accept the new evidence, which means that we shift our paradigm or our understanding of whatever the concept is. And so this is very important with race because we are born into it, right? It is our reality. Okay, this is Dr. Asa Hilliard, and again, I wanted to quote him to lay the foundation. So he says, the manifestation of racist behavior as a result of domination are the denial of reality, perceptual distortion, delusions of grandeur, phobias in the face of differences, and projecting blame or blaming the victim. Europeans had to lie to themselves about what Africa was and had been. And to keep that information going, one adapts to unreality. So when you see reality, it's necessary to deny it. So denial of reality would be to look at the population of Kemet and say it was a white population. That is flat out denial of what the facts say. It is not true that the white group is superior to anyone, and to believe in that is a psychological distortion of reality. So that is going along with cognitive dissonance. So again, at the foundation of understanding the construction of race, we have to understand epistemology and episteme. So epistemology is like the theory of knowledge. So what is knowledge? What do we believe to be true? What are we told is true? Those who determine what we call knowledge or episteme control what we consider to be truth. And I'm quoting my mother, Dr. Nadav here, Africologist. So epistemology, which refers to the theory of knowledge, questions the source of knowledge, its truth and validity, and so on. It shapes and is shaped by culture, which is very key. Truth should underpin the search for and responses to these questions so that logic can exist. Knowledge or lack of knowledge of the human story plays a vital role in what is believed about the past and therefore about possible futures. So, the Eurocentric pseudoscientific development of race. In the early 17th century, European and Euro-American scientists, pseudoscientists, began to characterize different groups of humans. They called them different races, and they based this on skin color, geographical place of origin, skull shape, hair texture, and color. Prior to this, to the 17th century, the Abrahamic religions, the story of Noah cursing his son or his grandson to be black people, so the descendants of Canaan, which is the son of Ham. This story comes up about 2 millennia ago and is a foundational piece in understanding these ideas of race and the hierarchization of humans and ordaining people to experience certain things. So this pseudoscience was used to justify colonialism, enslavement, and subjugation. and the treatment of people from places such as Australia, the Pacific Islands, the Caribbean, the Americas, and most prominently Africa. So Carl Linnaeus, he starts to, this is more recently, this hierarchization of humanity became quite developed. And Carl Linnaeus, who's a Swedish botanist and who is responsible for a lot of the names that we call many of the plants and animals were named by Linnaeus. They call him the father of taxonomy. So he names the races, the Europeanus, which is white people, white, sanguine, brownie with much long hair, blue eyes, gentle, acute, inventive, covered with fitted clothes and governed by laws. This is his subjective views, and this is deemed science. The Americanus, which are First Nations people, red, choleric, righteous, black, straight, thick hair, stubborn, zealous, free, and regulated by customs. The Asiaticus, yellow, melancholic, stiff, black hair, dark eyes, severe, haughty, greedy, covered with loose clothing and ruled by opinions. And the Africanus, black, phlegmatic, relaxed, black, frizzled hair, silky skin, flat nose, tumid lips, females without shame, mammary glands give milk abundantly, crafty, sly, lazy, cunning, lustful, careless, anoints himself with grease, and governed by caprice. Now, he's saying this in the 1700s, but actually, when we look even at the early 1900s and the stereotypes and caricatures that are created of African people, like in film in the United States, they follow some of these stereotypical, these ideas. So remember these constructions that actually they go back, the roots go back a little bit further. They don't pop up out of nowhere. So you have these subjective ideas, but that really determine, people really believed this to be science. And this is taught to all of us, really, right? Because they would deem this taxonomy. This is classification. So later on, you have Blumenbach, who's probably the most famous of the for classifying different races. So in 1795, he divides humans now into 5 races. These are he did it a few times, but this is the most famous one that he did, which is the Ethiopian, so dark-skinned people of Africa, the Mongoloid, people of Asia, and Eskimos of the Arctic, the Caucasoid, people of Indo-European areas, including some people of Asia and North Africa, the American native populations of the New World, and the Malay, Polynesians, Melanesians of the Pacific, and Aborigines of Australia. It's important to mention here that this fragmenting of people, so these dividing up into groups, is something that is very prominent today. We all kind of do this, right? Section ourselves off into these groups, so we don't really see the connectedness between ourselves and other groups of often oppressed peoples. And it is very much part of the culture that I'm going to get to much later, but the Northern Cradle culture. So remember culture in this, that it teaches us to fragment things and to not see the connectedness in these things. So Blumenbach, back to Blumenbach, he owned one of the largest skull collections, human skull collections. One of these skulls belonged to a Georgian woman, so by the Caucasus Mountains, and he thinks that this is the most beautiful skull that he's seen, and from this he surmises that humans must have originated in Europe, on Mount Caucasus. So this is where we get the word Caucasian, that again we think is scientific, and it describes a certain group of people, but it's this subjective, this man sort of thinking about things and saying, you know what, I'm gonna, and naming something, and then we have it today, like it really means something and it really represents somebody. We link it with whiteness, but it's really a man sitting there, writing and thinking about things, and then saying, yeah, okay, these people, we will be called Caucasian. That's what he names himself in the group that he comes from. Okay. So later, he admitted in his writings that all humans are one species and equal in capability and intelligence, and that all cultures had equally accomplished cultural development, including art, writing, and scientific investigation. He conceded that all humans could produce children that could be seen by any other humans as beautiful. Now, I added this because I want you to see that he clearly somewhat moved through a little bit of that cognitive dissonance, right? And this could be because he had such a large collection. He was known to have a very large collection of artifacts, of African artifacts and literature that one could surmise led to this change in thought of the equality of people. Excuse me. Okay. So racial hierarchy. Charles Darwin, who we all know, sadly, he's a geologist and biologist, and he develops the theory of evolution. And in The Descent of Man, he writes that the civilized races will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. So I'll go into more when we look around the globe what we see, but understand that race is a cultural construction. It's a construction. It's made up. It's not real. But if it were real, the savage races throughout the world, the races that would be not even exterminated, but that aren't really thriving, would be that which is classified as white, the Caucasian, right? Is this, which is why we see some people look into this constant, maybe a fear of what if white people are wiped out, or you look at someone like Frances Cress Welsing's work at this fear of racial extermination, which is it's not real, again, because race is constructed. So there's no people with very light skin maybe will always exist, maybe, depending on where we live, it's possible. But the African people we're never going to be wiped out. We've been here since the beginning. We are still here despite so much effort and genocide committed against us. We are not going anywhere. There is no fear. Okay, so humans share 99.9% of DNA. We've existed for about 250 to 300,000 years. All of today's humans are Homo sapiens. We left, some humans left Africa, so around 70 to 50,000 years ago. Not everybody, some people, nomadic people left Africa and went around the rest of the globe at different points in time and populated the rest of the globe. It's important to understand that in Africa we have the largest variation of phenotypes, which is the actual physical looks, and mitochondrial DNA. The largest variation, which makes absolute sense because humans originate in Africa. So you have the most diverse set of DNA and phenotypes on the continent. Humans then spread out across the globe, and we start to the way we look starts to change depending on our environments. So in time, some humans, again, we'll get to culture later on, but develop the idea that these phenotypes are races. So the way that your hair is, or that your nose are the shapes of our faces and the amount of melanin we have in our skin, these become races and geographical point of origin. So theories of polygenesis come about, in which the idea that humans originate in different parts of the globe, like in Asia and Europe and in Africa, these different humans that are different but similar. This has been disproven many times over. What we come from is a monogenesis, so we all share our DNA with an African woman about 150,000 years ago. Not the earliest human, but she's the earliest woman that we all have DNA that relates to. Yes, and so it does, right? There's only one race, the human race, and I do know how that sounds, so we're going to get into it. What are human races? They are cultural construction. It's a constructed category of identification based on physical characteristics, ancestry, historical connections, or shared culture. It holds no biological attributes. So genetic evidence has shown us that there are no racial divisions within the human species. It doesn't work as a biological system of classification. Often what we think of as race is culture. That's But because race has been sort of ingrained in us that it is real, it's hard to differentiate. So it's also a conceptual development used to build a hierarchy or levels of importance between human beings. It's an arbitrary classification of modern humans. It's sometimes based on various physical characteristics such as skin color, facial features, or eye shapes. Where does it begin? So we begin in Africa. We come out of Africa and we populate the rest of the globe. Our phenotypes and physical features change of these Africans who have left the continent. We change to suit the environments that we've moved to. The further away we get from the equator, we start to lose the melanin in our skin. And so you get lighter people the further away you get from the equator. But this happens over thousands and thousands of years. This is not over a short space of time of people living somewhere for even a century. We're talking millennia. When we're exposed to much less sun, it is beneficial to have less melanin in our skin. So, of course, on the continent of Africa and other places near to the equator, it wouldn't make sense. I say this just for when people look back at history and will try to talk about Kemet or different places across Africa or where highly melanated people are, and put in ideas that this could be people classified as white or very light-skinned people. The purpose of melanin is so that humans can survive in intense sunlight, right? It protects our skin so that we can be in the sun and still absorb vitamin D. And the same thing when people have lighter skin, it means that when there is less sunlight, the little bit of sunlight they get, because their skin is not protected with melanin, they will still be able to absorb the vitamin D from that little bit of sunlight. So the more melanin you have, the colder and the less sunlight that you experience, the more likely you're going to suffer. Obviously have vitamin D deficiency, but many other things, because you're not able to gain vitamins from the sun. Okay, it's the pigment that gives us hair, skin, eye colors. So the less pigment you have in your eyes, the lighter eye color you're going to have. It's important that we know this, because in fairy tales and in the different ideologies, these ideas of blue eyes and green eyes and blonde hair have been taught to us as if they're somehow superior, hence white supremacy. But this idea, when in fact blonde hair, blue eyes, green eyes, they are literally less amounts of melanin within our eyes and our hair follicles. African people sometimes produce children that have melanin production disorder called albinism. All people on all continents can produce children who have this condition, and so they have very little melanin. This just to show you, to sort of break down race a little bit, to understand that at any point in time, if you want to go back 20,000 years or 50,000 years, it's possible, before we even have what we consider European people or white people, that Africans can produce children who have this disorder in which we can't produce very much melanin. So we have 3 Brazilian children in the first picture with their siblings, a mother and siblings, and then 2 Congolese children, one with a father and one with a mother, who have albinism. Yes, beginning in the 18th century, a lot of effort was put into promoting this idea of light skin being beautiful and blue eyes and blonde hair being these symbols of beauty, and they were considered to be European attributes. But in fact, they're indigenous to many non-mixed people who haven't procreated with lighter skinned people or European people around the globe. So here are pictures of children from the Solomon Islands near Indonesia. Then we have children from, oh yeah, I'm so sorry. They're all children from the Solomon Islands, but they have no European ancestors. There is, with the eye colors, there is something different in this production. There's a certain type of blue that on very dark-skinned people comes out a different way, but ultimately it is still this lack of melanin, and you find this in African people. So again, this makes perfect sense when you understand that everybody originates in Africa, our ancestors originate in Africa, and that Africans went around the globe So these things like blonde hair and blue eyes that you see very much in European people didn't originate with what we understand to be Europe and European people today. So this is a map of human migration out of Africa, and it's just to give you an idea of when we're leaving Africa and reaching these different parts of the world. So remember, we're on the continent of Africa we're 250 to 300,000 years old, and we leave roughly between 50 and 70,000 years ago. So if you imagine that's about 200,000 years, we're just on the continent of Africa. And when we look at race today, we're just black people, what we consider black people today, right? We're just African. We're highly melanated to different degrees because we never all looked the same, but we're all what we consider today black for 200,000 years. Okay, here's an oceanography map from Encyclopedia Britannica, showing the currents that flow off of the coast of Africa on the northwest, western, and southern coast. They take a log boat, etc., straight to South, Central, and North America. Anyone who's read Van Sertima would be very familiar with this. And it's to show this because if you follow truth and logic, it all makes sense. And often people will argue against this, which is why cognitive dissonance is important to understand, because people they dig their heels in and they really think that they feel so sure of what they're saying when they go against certain ideas like the Olmec heads being African heads. So a number of finds in South and Central America, such as the Olmec heads, confirmed early African presence in these places. Now, when you come out of the race paradigm, you understand like that race is a construct. When we see the Olmec heads, it's what we often do is we would differentiate that from anybody who's in Mexico now, right? They are African, but so are Mexican people. Originally, they are African. So it isn't that it takes something away from the indigenous or First Nations Mexican people. It's that they are African, and so these heads represent African people who inhabited these lands originally, and also we have different. There are different First Nations people, people who look different phenotypically, and that's because of the routes that they've taken to get there. So when we see off the coast of Africa, you can see how a boat will come this way, but you can also go around a much longer way where you go through Eurasia to get there, and the phenotypes changed over that period. So you'll see different First Nations people that look different, and some look more African, and some look what we might consider less African. It doesn't make either of them actually less African. It just means that their phenotypes change because of long periods in these different parts of the world. So these are facial reconstructions from skulls found in Mexico, Brazil, and Romania, respectively. So 11,500 years ago, 12,000 years ago, and 35,000 years ago. And again, they've reached there in different routes. They're not all, they are all from Africa. Oh, I'm so sorry. They are all from Africa, and they look different again than some of the First Nations people that you will see in Brazil or Mexico, and certainly different than people you might see in Romania today. They are, however, the ancestors of those people. Some of them, so as I say, the roots are different, but these are the indigenous people of these lands. This is the first modern Briton, or the oldest skeletal remains that they've found of the first modern Briton. So it's about 10,000 years old, and they say that he had dark to black skin, curly hair, and blue eyes. He's named Cheddarman, and it's to show you again, when we think of race, this is so recent, what we understand to be race. So 10,000 years ago in Britain, this is what people look like. This is what an indigenous English person or British person, we didn't have Britain and England back then, but in that massive land, this is what the people look like. So again, these ideas and this idea of white supremacy is like, it didn't exist. This is not, people didn't have lighter skin, and that meant anything or meant that somebody was superior. And it's existed since as far back really as we could go. You know, as I say, we've been able to produce children that weren't able to produce much melanin. So now that there are people who've adapted to a certain environment and have very little melanin, it doesn't mean anything. They're just humans in that part of the world whose ancestors are also African, despite you know, what many of them have done, and we talk about that when I get to culture. Okay, so these are examples of some of the people with the oldest DNA, so the least changed DNA from different parts of the world. Again, obviously, who migrated from Africa. So you have Melanesian children in the first picture, Pimos First Nations people, a Fiji Islander, indigenous Hawaiian women, so Polynesians, and an Andaman Islander near the south coast of India. The Andaman Islanders are the oldest people in that part of the world, right? And you see he's got very dark skin. And African, his DNA is it's very highly connected to Africa. So the further away we get and the longer away we've been away from Africa, people's DNA starts to change. And when different groups of people, not races, but groups mix stuff, this tiny percent of our DNA changes. With groups that don't mix at all, their DNA is so close to original groups like Khoisan people. These are Khoisan people from South Africa, or Khoikhoi and San people. They're believed to be the oldest living human group. And I always think this is so interesting because when you look at them, people often say they have Chinese features or Southeast Asian features that are obviously African features. And so when we look at people in China and Korea, and they're not all the same people, but Japan, and we see people that look like that, those are actually African features. So this is where we find them first. And when you think of this picture of this, the human journey, right, you can see, because we were never all the same on the continent of Africa, with different groups of people. And the more we move around, the more we change, right? Because our environment changes us. And so we look different, and we're always coming back together and mixing with each other. And then our children look slightly different. And so we're constantly changing as humans. Then we move around the globe again, and these environments change drastically, and we look different. But there are certain things that remain steadfast. And again, within the race paradigm, it's very difficult because we have a certain idea. If your nose is a certain way, if your hair is a certain way, if your lips are a certain way, that this defines something. But in fact, you can't, it's not that easy to tell. So we look at certain people, you know, we think when you say Latino, people think it means this particular thing, but many Latino people are just mixed with African and European and First Nations because of the history of the places that they come from. And then that look becomes this way that we identify Latino, but we don't think that it's black or that it's African, or we just think it's a particular group of people that particularly look this way. But in fact, it's just different humans who've been out of Africa and for different amounts of time that have come together at this place, you know, in the Americas. Okay, these are indigenous Tasmanian people. So in the 1800s, these first two, the Tasmanians were almost entirely killed off. There are some who survived, but almost all of them were killed off during British colonization throughout the 19th century. They were actually killed. Many of them also died from disease and stuff from these people coming onto their island and taking their land. The third and fourth photos are Australian First Nations people, women and children who've only legally been considered citizens since 1967. And it's to when you look at people around the globe, it's just interesting because how do you classify their race, right? Now Blumenbach and Linnaeus tried, you know, they would class them as Mongoloids or something, but when we understand, the way we try to understand race today, we consider them black, right? You wouldn't think a police officer would treat them differently or say, are you from Tasmania or Australia? Or, you know, they see them as a black person. But often when we say black people, we're not including people from Papua New Guinea or from Tasmania. We don't mean that. We don't mean people from Sri Lanka or Dalits in India. We mean a often African American or Afro-Europeans, but that's because race is not real, and so it's always shifting ways in which we understand race, the ways we think of ourselves and each other. These are the Aetas, also known as the Negritos, which means little black man. But they're the indigenous people of the Philippines, so Southeast Asia. They still exist there today, and they're the oldest Filipino people. Now, Filipino people are quite dark, anyways. But when you see the first Filipinos, you know that are we see got there from Africa, and again, when we think of Filipinos, we don't think of black people, we don't think of African, and yet these are the oldest people in that part of the world. And they do suffer racism, as you could all imagine. All of the people that I'm showing you have been, often displaced or treated poorly because of white supremacy, because of this Manichaean idea of like lightness and whiteness being superior and darkness, blackness being inferior, which is constructed. It's not a natural state or natural idea. It's constructed, and it serves certain purposes. It justifies, as I said before, colonization, enslavement, subjugation of people that are not things that originate with this. They are things that exist within this culture, and this is a way to justify it. If you put people, if you say you are ordained to be on the bottom, you are scientifically on the bottom, then obviously you can do whatever to them and just say, well, science has said this is okay, religion says this is okay. These people aren't fully human, they're not quite equal to me. So it's important to know the purpose that it serves. So this is Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, multi-genius, and his two cradle theory is really important, again, to understand this construction. The two cradle theory asserts that there's the southern cradle and the original culture that we all come out of. And again, remember, it isn't just before we left Africa, but it's the original culture that's practiced as far as we can go back in Africa. This matriarchal culture that he calls African matriarchy, that is not really that women ruled, but more that the mother is honored, the woman is honored, because we'd cease to exist really without the mother. And I give the example, it's not about inferior or superior, but if a male and female conceive a child and the father is killed right after that, humanity could still exist, right? That child could still be born, right? But the mother, if the mother is gone, there's no, right? The baby can't be born. There's such an importance of the mother, and so this African matriarchy isn't about women being superior, but it's about honoring the woman, and that respect must be there between male and female. And then in Eurasia, much later, we have this much more recent culture, the Northern Cradle culture, that is developed while in this part of the world, Eurasia. Remember, so Africans have moved out. We've carried this culture, this original Northern Cradle culture, everywhere, even to Eurasia, even parts of Europe, right? And there are different scholars you can look at. There's a woman in the UK, Marie Charles, who's looking at this, at the ancient African connection in Europe, that looks at Stonehenge and all these artifacts that are found that you can link to different civilizations in Africa, and that show us, and we see Cheddarman, we see the British person 10,000 years ago, that you could see the Africans and our culture was very present in Europe even, but in Eurasia, there's periods of ice, harsh weather, harsh climate, and a lack of abundance of food and warmth. And at some point in the last several thousand years, this culture shifts from, so these African matriarchal people in this part of the world, the culture starts to shift to this patriarchal culture where the man becomes superior over the woman, and this imbalance. So African matriarchy, I'm sorry, I also need to point out that male and female, that balance, that is the concept of ma'at, right? This ancient concept that we have in Kemet of ma'at, justice, harmony, balance, order, And as we venture out of the continent, we carry this culture with us. And when this new culture that starts to develop and becomes patriarchal, the first imbalance is set about. And from there, within this Northern Cradle culture, you start to get this hierarchization of humans, which later produces the cultural construction of race. Okay, this is Linda James Myers. She's a cultural psychologist, and I wanted to sort of come to a close with a quote from her. She says, if we assume a single gene pool, accept the most current archaeological and anthropological evidence, and follow what has been shown to be true of dominant genes for color versus recessive, that is, that light skin is a genetic mutation of dark skin, that is just true. That's what you get on a color in animals and in humans, right? Lighter skin is a genetic mutation of darker skin. That's how we get lighter skin. Color versus recessive. All people can be said to be of African descent, depending on how far back they wish to go in tracing their ancestry. We owe it to ourselves to understand the nature of the conceptual system that yielded the first culture from which all other conceptual systems and culture evolved. So really to understand, and this is reflective of the work of Ben Buchanan, Cheikh Anta Diop, and Van Sertima, to name a few, but the importance of understanding, whichever way we take this, into the future, that it is a cultural construct and it was developed to oppress us. And so we have learned within this oppressive system ways in which to benefit from race, ways in which to survive through it, ways in which to, hold our community together. Like it has become important, but it's important for us to understand that it was given to us to oppress us. So as much as we want to use it to strengthen us, it was developed to oppress us. So it's a very significant cultural development that's contributed to societal and individual fragmented views, again, that break us up into these different groups of people. It has given support to the continued oppression of people based on their so-called race and held people in superior positions globally. It keeps us very divided as well, because again, when I show you all these groups of people, if you dig into the history of some of the people that I showed you from around the globe, the ways that they've been made to suffer, we have been made to suffer so much here in Europe, on the continent of Africa, but this racialization of humanity has justified the brutalization and genocide of people, especially the darkest people, all around the globe that might not be today considered African, but they are also, our people, and it's race that really divides us, stops us from seeing this sameness and this unity. So it is important to understand that although it's a cultural construct, it's not true. And moving into the future, we want to move towards that Southern Cradle culture, come away from this Northern Cradle culture that dominates the world, really. We're all sort of within it. We do practice different cultures within it, but the overarching culture, when we look out at the moment around the globe and see all these wars going on, the Northern Cradle culture is very warring. We see that since its inception. It's very warring, it's chaotic, it is imbalanced. And so not only do we get this hierarchization of humanity, but this constant battle and theft and greed. So we want to move towards the Southern Cradle culture, towards this ma'atic balance. We need to follow truth and logic and shift our cultural orientation towards the original culture and develop it to suit the future that we wish to see for our children, grandchildren, and all those that follow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow, that's what we do here at the MKA Institute. Wow. I mean, we you know what is so beautiful is that we got a $5,000, maybe a $10,000 lecture, and she didn't charge us that much. I'm so happy. This is real. I mean, just the understanding of race, the cultural construction. I just want to thank you so much, Hope Dove. And I say to those of you who are online, and we have a pretty good group online and everywhere, that this is a kind of PhD student that we produce at Temple University. And I know there are many universities and people who are throughout the world who would love to have a professor and a scholar like this. But right now, we're just pleased at her presentation. And it's one of those presentations where I sat there and just learned myself. And I thank you so much, Hope Dove, for this presentation. At this time, I am sure, as always, there are some questions or some ideas. And I know that doctor will be the first one. So come right up.
Just want to, again, congratulate you on an outstanding lecture. Again, we learned a lot to reiterate Dr. Asante. My question is, can we overcome European and Arab supremacy peacefully?
Maybe not now. It's a difficult one. I believe in a ma'atic sense that the way into that future that we want to see, it starts with education. When I think of the change happening, I think the more people that understand truth, that follow truth and logic, that follow Afrocentric curriculum and ideas that start in Africa, that if we teach children the truth from this perspective, that eventually those children are going to be the ones in power, and that they will be able to make the changes. Because when we think of the people that are in power now, these are people who've been taught they've been taught Eurocentric history and sciences and all of these lies, So even the ones that we want to blame and that we should blame in a certain sense, they're products of that. These leaders that are doing these things, they are products of that. And they're taught, that stuff is true. They're taught to practice this culture and enforce this culture. And I in a dream world, or in the very optimistic vision of the future, I feel that if we educate, the more young people that we can educate to know truth, if you know better, you'll do better. And that's not what we're living in. We don't live in a society that everybody's taught the truth and then acts like this.
Well, thank you very much for an extremely extraordinary presentation.
Thank you so much.
I want to say that my husband and I both teach at Rowan University, and one of the things we do is we start off the curriculum. I don't care if they say that your course is going to be hotchkotch, you know how to jump. We start off with the curriculum of just the human origins of, and Africa and its contribution, and that, all races are constructed. There is no all race. There's one, and it comes from Africa. And we do the whole migration out of Africa. And so I had a white student, about 22 years old, but looked like he was about 30 years old, but his mother came up to complain to the school that I teach I teach this information, and that the course started with that. His mother came to complain, and the dean actually came. I was reprimanded with the dean, and I said, well, if I'm teaching hotchkotch, I'm teaching how to jump rope. It starts with that. Absolutely. So if you don't like it, I mean, what? His mother came, and you're going to question me about? So I'm telling you, it's a difficult situation to teach truth and to teach history and to be at schools who are predominantly white, like Rowan University, and stand your ground on what you're going to teach. So your presentation was so wonderful. Boy, I don't know what his mother would have did if.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's what we need. People teaching that truth, right? It's necessary.
Okay, I have one first. Thank you so much. What you said was not only fascinating, also just inspiring to look further into history and things like that. I have 2.5 questions. I'll make them quick. With the Olmec heads, what year were they made and what language were they speak? Was this pre-colonization?
Yes.
Okay, so the heads predate them being a colonized people.
Yes.
Okay, do you know by how many
I
years?
want to say they're about 3,000 years
Good
old,
Lord. So,
but
okay, so and when did colonization take place?
from the yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's a good
14.
amount of distance between when they were made and what we think of now. Like when we think of Aztecs and Mayans and all these people, we think of them as looking one way, but in reality, that's probably just Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is, race is a construct, and we all understand that, but what about the epigenetic history of people? Like the things that just get passed down epigenetically through generation after generation after generation. Do you feel that that has an effect on people in a racial context that does differentiate us from each other?
Yes. People from different parts of the world who experience similar. When we think of like the enslavement in the Americas, right? That the epigenetics. This is like Dr. Joy DeGroy's post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? Definitely, there are effects of that, and before that they were doing research on the Holocaust, on Jewish people who experienced the Holocaust, and they could see that in their progeny that there were still traumatic effects. So yes, but not in a racial way. It's groups of people experiencing similar things. So when we think historically of the way people have been treated, so maybe there will be a similarity to certain epigenetics in Brazil and America to people, but somebody from like someone from the Maasai or something, that's not going to link, even though we're all Africans. Does that make?
Sure, absolutely. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I was breaking my neck to get here from Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. And sister, I don't even know how to thank you. It's impossible to thank you because your research has dismantled all of my wasted time in the university studying anthropology, sociology, and living in this mess we call America, and us identifying with some false concepts and living it and making it real. It made me think of one of our musicians called Sun Ra, who said, and maybe I'm a paraphrase as much as I can, if you're not a myth, you're a reality. Whose reality are you? If you're not a reality, you're a myth. Whose myth are you? And I struggled with that since I started getting into music when I left high school. And I heard that and read it on the liner notes, and it stuck with me till now. But sister, I'm telling you, your power in this lecture has given me a new, different insight on how I should study now. And I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Honestly, you have no idea. Thank you.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you so much, Hope. It's our first time to meet.
So
I used
Dr.
to meet
Jara.
you. Definitely.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Excellent. I'm really happy to be here for that. And really, I learned a lot. And that's really impressive. And thank you for that. And then during the presentation, I was impressed by the pictures of the Khoisan. And then I would like just to ask you if you have document probably, because they are from Southern Africa, which trace probably the migration in case. Because those people look like terribly the Asians. And then I don't know if you have like a clue about that.
Do you know I don't? I don't, but I'm not an anthropologist, and I think that it's so important, that connection, that journey to be made. I mean, you can see it, but I don't think a lot has gone into making the journey, the actual connection, because I think because it's truth, and because all of this, you know, it pulls the rug out of white supremacy and the construction of race that serves so many purposes, that I think it's cognitive dissonance would stop people from wanting to even unveil that, right? You don't often hear people talking about Asian people or people from Southeast Asia and their African origins or their Khoisan connections. So I hope that they will that there will be a more clear route tracked of, you know, because we can see definitely people who originated from that part of South Africa ended up in Asia.
I was going to say, suggest Runoko Rashidi's work.
Yes, Runoko Rashidi for sure.
Sure. Is there a question?
Sure. The internet seems to be excited. Paris, France, the loudest in the group. They seem to love, they're energized by this presentation. They say that this is prophetic for future generations, laying the concept and context of what we have come to know as racial grouping of humanity, and how used as a subject of groups of people. It's a beautiful comment. The question was, do you happen to know why Italians were not considered white at one time in America? Is that something you know?
Because whiteness is a construct, so it's not a scientific thing, and when it benefited Americas as this country was developing, as immigrants came in who weren't originally considered white, ultimately they were able to be absorbed into the construction of whiteness, because we were already over here. The African people had been subjugated. First Nations people had been much, killed or moved into small parts of land, and so this became this sort of strength in having greater numbers of whiteness. So Italians are one of the later immigrants to this country, like on mass scale. Yes.
Yeah, I think Italy is very close to Africa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of miscegenation and whatever else going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at one time, the northern Italians were basically Germanic people, and then after the Africans started coming over and doing whatever they did, they became darker. That's where the olive skin and the dark hair.
Absolutely, and a lot of Sicilian people. You look, they have African hair, very curly hair and dark skin, as you say. Yeah.
Let's give her another round.
Thank you all so much, and thanks for these great questions.
Thank you so much. There are many issues open up here, many powerful issues. I just want to take up two of them. The first one, the reason that there has not been the kind of study that we need to have regarding migration out of Africa to Asia is because that has not benefited the people who give grants and research money for that kind of study. One of the first things that struck me as a professor, and the Nyahumas, both of them are professors here, and they know this. They've traveled a lot and certainly lived in Africa. One of the things that struck me was how it was not a study of the relationship of ancient Kemet, Nile Valley civilizations, to the rest of Africa. Even in Africa, it was a big problem. And recently, over the last 20, 25, 30 years, there have been people now who are looking at the relationship of Zulu mathematics, for example, to the ancient Egyptian mathematics. There are people now who are looking at the relationship of Africans in the eastern part of the continent of Africa to people in Asia. And I am sure that this will come with the Khoisan, and it will definitely come with those people at the Cape, because we have now an understanding that there are different ways that we can approach migration, and we don't have to just look at it simply because the northern part, the so-called northern part of the world have defined what should be looked at and what should be studied. I mean, I was shocked that we were not necessarily as Africans studying our relationship earlier between the continent of Africa and Asia. We were always looking at the continent of Africa and Europe, or the continent of Africa and Arabia. But we didn't go further, you see. But that was because of the colonial construction. That's what they looked at. We looked at what white people looked at. We looked at what Arabs looked at. But we didn't look at what Africans ought to be looking at in terms of where we have gone and what we have done. I want to just also say something about the question, which was a good question and a good comment from the people in Paris about Italians. And I think that the answer was excellent. I think that sometimes we forget that when you have this notion of the construction of race, that it's about benefiting people. It's about white supremacists. That's what we have seen for the last 500 years. So it is true that right here in Philadelphia, where we live, we are in a section of Philadelphia called Germantown. You know why it's called Germantown? It's called Germantown because the English did not want Germans in Philadelphia. So this is where the Germans, this is where Rittenhouse and all those people set up shop because they could not live in Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin said it. He wrote it very clearly. Didn't want these Germans in Philadelphia, you see? So you get these distinctions, but of course, eventually the Germans were co-opted into that system with the English, and the French were co-opted, the Swedes were co-opted into that, and then you get this Northern European notion, which left out the Italians and the Greeks and the Spaniards. But now, almost any group that wants to be against black people can be considered white. So you can be Mexican and say, I'm white, you know. You can be Turkish and say, I'm white, you know. I'm Iranian and I'm white. Because what that does is to increase the numbers for that notion of white racial supremacy. We fight against all of it. And we're capable of doing it, and we will continue to do it. And I just want to thank you for listening to our lecture and our lecturer, and give her once again another round of applause. Those of you who want to, you can contribute or donate to the MKA Institute by going online to the MKAinstitute.com. And there are a number of ways you can donate. And you can donate to us. And those of you who will share the video with others, we hope you will do that. Because that's another way that we're hoping that we get a larger audience and we are able to continue to support these lecturers. I want to say again, remember, on the 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the angriest man in America, Michael Cord, will be speaking here about the meaning of the American elections after next week, because I think there are elections next week, so Tuesday. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things turn out. So we look forward to seeing you here. We call upon our ancestors, the mother of our mothers, the father of our fathers, to render mercy and to bear witness for the liberation and the victory of all oppressed people forever. It is done. Asante Sana. Ashe. All right. Thank you all. Thank you very much.